Good morning, everybody. We have the distinct pleasure of having the first session after 3 different happy hours last night, so I appreciate everybody showing up. This is the Adapting to Soccer Consumption Trends, and we've got as diverse a panel as the choice of wardrobe, from the Gen Z Bleacher Report cool to the Eurofit suit that is apropos of every Soccerex conference. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different consumption patterns and how the industry is changing, topics that we'll no doubt touch: rise of OTT, the role of traditional media, the channel mix, general fan engagement, and localization of content, as we have a number of people who are manning offices in international locations. But to start, I would like everyone to just sort of give a 30-second intro of who they are and what they do to give some context. And we'll start with Jerome.
Good morning, everybody. Jérôme de Chonac. I'm the managing director of Paris Saint-Germain here in the Americas, covering both North and South America. We opened the office 18 months ago. Our role is basically to grow the brand and grow the business here in the Americas. And before that, I have a background in sports marketing agencies at an international level.
Travis Redkey, GM of BR Football. I was actually going to say New Balance dad, but Z cool, it works pretty well for me. Lead the content efforts for BR Football, which is a portfolio brand of Bleacher Report, across the world and all social platforms. We have 15 million followers following BR Football. Also the forward-facing brand of our Champions League coverage here stateside. Have been here for about 2.5 years now. Started at BR 12 years ago, but I'm back for my second stint.
My name is Eddie Rivaldi. I am the marketing manager for the Bundesliga International office in New York, and we oversee all of the Americas, North and South. Our office opened last October 2018, so we have about a year anniversary just a few weeks ago. And I basically oversee with my colleague Diego digital marketing. We see all of the marketing initiatives for the Americas region.
My name's Ian Nolan. I'm the head of content at Manchester United. I run the TV network, that's MUTV, website, application, matchday programs, social media. Got over 150 million followers there. Been at the club about just under a year. I actually joined the same week Jose left, so I'm always going to remember when the year's up, when my year anniversary is. Prior to this, I started at Yahoo Sports. I was running Yahoo Sports international sites, everything out of the US for 10 plus years, a couple of startups in between, and then landed at Manchester United about a year ago.
Good morning. My name is Eli Velasquez. I'm the Executive Vice President of Sports Content for NBC Universal Telemundo Enterprises. It's my pleasure and honor to manage the team that executes on our FIFA World Cup Association. I work together with NBC Sports Group and my colleagues from Stanford on the execution of the Olympics. We also leverage Premier League coverage here in the United States together with NBC Sports. And it's my responsibility to develop and evolve the brand Telemundo Deportes as we address these consumption patterns and changing trends and how people are sampling content and enjoying their sports. I've been at Telemundo for 20 years. Before then, I was at Univision for another 7, and I've been in the Hispanic and Spanish language media space my entire career.
Thank you, guys. And just to complete that, I'm Sean Coyner. I'm the SVP of Content at DAZN. Through the iterations of DAZN/Perform, I've largely been in charge of content and product worldwide across all of our direct-to-consumer brands, the largest of which is Goal, which has the largest international audience on owned and operated in the world. So we have a diverse group in terms of clubs, leagues, media. We will try to touch upon all of those as it relates to trends, which is an open-ended subject. But Jerome, you're closest to me, so I'll start with you. You're in charge of reinforcing the PSG brand presence in the Americas. When we see clubs like yours and Man U for Ian, what's the ultimate goal of those localization efforts? Is it partnerships? Is it simply growing the brand and the fan base in that market? What's your ultimate goal as a localized operator and market?
So 18 months ago, as I said, we opened the office here. We opened at the same time an office in Asia. I think obviously one of the main objectives of that is being able to be closer to our fans in those respective regions. And by being closer, I mean being able to engage more with them, being able to provide them with a better access, being able to provide them with a more personalized, localized content, but also facilitate the engagement that the fans have on a more physical basis, if I can say so. So organize the tours, create fan clubs, create academies and stuff like that. I think for us, especially from a media standpoint, what is really important is to work on 3 different things. One is our own media, obviously, and how we can enhance, create more content, more access, personalize more through the different platforms that we have. It's also about working with the broadcasters of this world. I'm between Bleacher and DAZN, so obviously digital media is critical, and more the evolving landscape is impacting how we engage with our fans. But being able to work with beIN for the League One or with Turner Bleacher for Champions League and create opportunities for those media broadcasters to provide more access to our local fans, to our club, is critical. And then obviously it's about going beyond those broadcasters with any type of media opportunity we have and create bespoke content that is not necessarily only about our players, our games, but at PSG we definitely have a very much entertainment lifestyle positioning. So it's also how do we provide access to this type of different content to our fan, and how we create something that would be relevant to the US fans or the Latin American fans.
Ian, you've been in your role, like you said, a year at Manchester United, obviously talking about localization and that, talking to you, you have a very deep channel mix of content that you produce across TV, OTT, written, social. How does that, what's driving sort of the decision making for your team, and what's that localization process look like for you?
Well, just to add to Jerome's point, the localization is a huge focus for us at the moment. We spent a good chunk of last year in China trying to bury our roots a bit deeper in China with local agencies and local local fans who understand the nuances and the local knowledges and local culture. Because without that, you don't really have authenticity. And what we try to do in every market that we operate in is have real authenticity. So the fans, I think you mentioned it, relevance is the key thing, but the fans really feel like the content's relevant, it cuts through. So we do a lot of original content. Previously, it was a lot of translations. We're moving more and more into original content creation, be that articles and video. So we approach localization in a very bespoke way per market. And
have you seen any gains in doing it with the true nuance of the local market versus the sort of simple translations that you talked about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our original content cuts through more than the translated content does. Obviously, there are some outlier cases, like breaking news is always going to be breaking news. New transfers, injury news is always going to perform well. But in terms of the original content that we do, it's key that we have that local nuance, that local fan culture and knowledge, so we know which players resonate, which moments resonate. So that's been a focus for the good part of the year I've been there, but for a few years now at the club. And then in terms of our content mix, more broadly, as you said, the second part of your question, we use a lot of data to carve up and slice and dice our content. So we've always had the great thing about the club is it's got a 24/7 always on news network or TV network. So a lot of long form content, a lot of video content. We also have magazines and we have match day programs, which is really deep, original, long form content. And we've spent a good part of the last 2 or 3 years figuring out usage of those, how they work on different platforms, all the way down to social media, where, as you know, people are looking for snackier, shorter, sharper content, but trying not to lose that tone of voice and that real value they have at the top. So yeah, it's all driven by data, and as we get deeper, as technology evolves, we're immersed in more and more data. So it's a good space to be at the moment.
Yeah. One more localization. Eddie, as from a league federation standpoint, you're
charge of the Americas piece.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about your localization efforts and what that looks like at a league level?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the advantage, especially at the Bundesliga, that we kind of have own the whole media value chain, from filming camera match days to the actual execution delivery of the content. We also have the advantage that we kind of have content from all of the clubs. So in the example of the United States, we have a bunch of, I think 12 and 6 really relevant American players playing in the clubs. So for localization for us, that means kind of leveraging those players in the U.S. context and making sure we're creating a connection and raising the awareness of the league through them. In Latin America, yeah, it's not just about translation, but it's also about finding cultural connection and touch points, commonalities and similarities between what the German league, the Bundesliga, has to offer, and finding that within the local domestic leagues. A couple of weeks ago, we had an experience in Brazil, in Rio, and we created a localized content campaign around Rafinha, FC Bayern. Now he's playing in Flamengo. Flamengo's in the final for the Libertadores. That cut through better than most of the content we've done on a kind of a general level, and we touched the story, and it wasn't all Bayern. It was about his story, about who he was as a player, as a Brazilian coming to Germany. And we find that those stories, when you find those localizations that people in the home country can relate to, cuts through.
You talked about that cultural connection. Bleacher, as a friendly competitor of ours at the Zone and Goal, I would give ultimate credit for always being in touch with the cultural zeitgeist of sports and understanding things on and off the pitch. Obviously, Bleacher has made a big play in football. Yeah. Owning Champions League rights for the next 3 years. Obviously, there's been a change there, but there's been a big stake in the ground, and there's always been a Gen Z focus for that group. How did getting those rights and that soccer focus, is that a natural evolution of Bleacher and in this market, or did sort of getting the rights was it opportunistic and that's where you went hard against it?
I think it's a combination of both. When I hear actually a couple of the guys speak about authenticity, it's kind of our bread and butter and what drives our content vision. And the way that we think about speaking to diehard soccer fans or casual soccer fans here in the States who might be NBA fans but might play FIFA or own a Jordan brand kit. The way that we, I have one myself, thanks to you guys. Of course. But the way that we think about covering the sport is really, we sit, and we like to say we sit at the crossroads of sport and culture, right? The way we cover the game, and it's already been said before too, is we want to show you the best of what's on the field, but we also want to show you the best of what's off the field. We want to get you to know the personas of the people who shape the sport. And we've done that over the last 5+ years around the NBA, and we've become kind of the defining voice of our generation around the NBA. And we saw, prior to acquiring Champions League rights, and subsequently after having been broadcasting and covering it over the last year and a half, there is a lot of opportunity to do that here stateside as well around soccer. And the personalities involved in soccer are just as interesting, if not more, than your NBA stars here. There's a lot of similarities in lifestyle. There's a lot of similarities in interests. There's a common love between the two sports. And while we want to harp and capitalize on those similarities between the two sports, it's also very important, to go back to what I was saying, to speak authentically to the fan, right? And one of the ways that we go about covering the sport, which I think it can work across sports, is tapping into the universal fan experience and the universal experience of being an athlete, and bringing those two together. So I'd say, while our programming hasn't been traditionally a bunch of people sitting behind a desk analyzing the sport, what's important to us is giving you a full spectrum coverage of the game. So if you look at the performance of our highlights and the reaction to and ratings of our coverage of Champions League, it's done very well. But you look at a series that we've come up with called The Champions, which is this animated series where all of the Champions League teams, their players, and their managers all live together in one reality-style mansion. It's the best performing series Bleacher Report's ever put out. So What's important to us, just to go back to it again, is really coming up with concepts that not only connect with the diehard fans here, but also continue to grow the audience and show an audience stateside that their Steph Currys, their LeBron Jameses, their James Hardens exist on a much grander scale outside of here, and their skill sets and their personalities are just as interesting, if not more, as the sports that they consume daily here.
Absolutely. Eli, you've been at Telemundo Deportes for a long time. So you've seen a lot of evolution in terms of, let's call it, traditional broadcast media, but also being in Spanish-focused, the intersection of Spanish-focused content and soccer, obviously a large overlap. Just very generally, even time framing it since you've had Premier League rights with NBC, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen being in that space from a language perspective, from a soccer perspective, broadcast perspective in that time?
So in the time I've been in the industry, I've seen an amazing amount of growth for soccer fandom and consumption in this country. And I'm very enamored by that because I've been in the business long enough to see it realized, and I think there's just so much more to come. Since we were able to acquire the rights to the Premier League through our association with NBC Sports and also our FIFA rights to the World Cups, we've decided that we needed to leverage that to the extent that we can and pick up on the trend that I noticed over time of real fandom for this sport. What we've seen is we've seen quadrupling of audiences. So since the World Cup of 2018, our digital audience has grown 4 times. For us, right, it's a big accomplishment to go from the Russia World Cup to now and see that we've grown that much to 11 million in our digital audience, 7 million app downloads. 3 million likes on Facebook and Instagram for us is a huge deal. And when you consider that, we don't have a sports network per se, so I play the role of traditional media, I get that, but when I think about how far we've come in spite of not having that platform, it's because we have embraced what all of these gentlemen are talking about and what this panel is about, right? That content is king. It's been said cliche for so long, but it truly is. And we've taken an approach at Telemundo Deportes where we've broken down the barriers between linear and nonlinear. We've decided that it's about a content play first, what's meaningful, what's authentic, what is it that the social experiences we've seen since Russia World Cup inform our decision-making on the kinds of content we're going to produce. And then we do a second layer, right, on, where's the best form of distribution for that? It could be the linear side, it could be the nonlinear side, it could be both. But we're not fighting the forces, if you will. It's a complete and total embracing of where the industry is taking us. And so, taking a long, roundabout way to answer your question, I've seen tremendous growth since when we started with the Premier League and since when we executed the World Cup. So much so that now my mandate or my job title was changed in order to encompass all content across platforms. And so now I manage that group and their thought process has changed. The chip has changed. And it's not easy when you're in a traditional media company to get people to understand or to adapt quickly to these market forces. And I think that, our president, Ray Warren, was very clear to me on day one that we had to embrace that and attack it early on. And so that's why we've made inroads into esports. We've done things with web services. There's a lot of things that we're looking at, which is addressing an evolving audience that has spoken to us and said, we want choice, we want convenience, and we want you to embrace where the technology is taking all of us. I do not think that means that they're mutually exclusive. I still think that the linear side or traditional media still has a part to play. It's almost an inverse, right, where traditional media, whenever you do something on digital, is seen as a digital extension to what's on the linear side. I believe in a world where linear still is strong and where digital, right, can inform some of the things that we want to do as extensions on linear. So if you embrace it, if you sort of wrap your arms around it and you're okay with the fact that this is about the fan, it's about the audience and what they want, and you adapt to it tactically and strategically, you're going to have success. And so we're very bullish on that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think that evolution of the organization where it's just a content org from someone who historically worked in at places that had print and digital, it was the same sort of, we have to approach content from a general standpoint and what work can that content do. So now sort of open it up to everybody, sort of chime in after I all up. And you made a comment about data, we all want data, right? Oh, get on a panel, yeah, we need more data, we use data. But what data is important to you guys in your roles? And almost importantly, because I think this could matter for some of the people in the room, where do you want the source of that to be? Is it proprietary? Is it third party? What's the thing that helps take the analysis that you need to do your jobs better? And what are you using and where do you want it to come from?
To Eli's point, actually, we use a lot of data from social networks, so Facebook and YouTube, for example, just because it's so deep and they are the experts when it comes to building those dashboards and really creating the data points that matter for that platform. But we're taking a lot of those learnings and then applying them to YouTube, for example. We're applying them to our video creation, video production on MUTV, because that's where the richest data is. And then in MUTV on our RNO, we're sort of duplicating what YouTube gives us to make sure that we use the same metrics and we follow it through. So there's a lot of cross-pollination of data points that we use. But we always start with the fan. So we survey and we talk to thousands and thousands of fans across lots of markets every single year, just to understand what they want and try to keep them at the core of everything we do. And then the quantitative stuff is kind of like the padding, the shoulder stuff that we use to operate on a day-to-day basis.
No, I was going to obviously totally agree with that. I was going to add that obviously we have access to tons of data and from many different ways. And the past 5 years have been incredible in terms of improving our understanding of those data. But it is still very much a work in progress. And the other thing is, I think it's about for us creating a virtual circle of having the data, understanding them, create the best product, and then the best content. And if we can create this, then we will be able to not only customize or localize content, but also personalize content moving forward, or not just content, by the way, engagement with our fans. And no matter where you are and what kind of consumption you have of your passion point, which is PSG, you will get what you are really interested in at the time when you're interested in order to better consume your passion. So this is critical, not just to see data as a bunch of information, but how we feed that into the development of our products and the creativity that we bring to our content creation.
Yeah, for us too, it's marrying the data that we collect on social and via our app as well, to making sure that we have the right people in place that are on voice and on brand for us, and giving them the freedom to test, right? We want to give our most creative team members the opportunity to come up with a new concept, test the hypothesis, and it fails, but at least give them the opportunity to say, look, you're one of the defining voices of BR Football or Bleacher Report or House of Highlights. We want to encourage you to come up with something. You're here for a reason. We're not just going to go solely on, if we went solely by data, all we would do is program jersey swaps, right? Because those perform really well. But at the same time, then everything becomes commoditized. Right. So what you want to constantly be doing is pushing your team members. So it's a combination of the two.
I was going to say, I think it's a balancing act, right? I think one of the things I've seen in my time is the growth of digital-specific research departments within the larger organization. And what we've done is sort of try to collectively look at all of the sources that are out there. I think proprietary data is something everyone wants to have, clearly. But I think if you want to cast a wider net and understand where everyone is consuming and how they're consuming, it's great to sort of get a collective of reports and behaviors that you can tap into to inform what you want to do with your content. I think ultimately, service to the fan was said, agree with that 1,000%. And then to your point, I think you also have to look at what is the content that resonates the most in an authentic way, and then push your own people to try and determine some interesting nuances that you can test out, right? Like there's nothing wrong with testing things, failing fast, hopefully you don't fail, right? But testing things to see where you can create that next big moment or that next must-have viral or consumption trend that perhaps you can tap into. And I think, if you keep an open mind and you try to collectively look at it the way that we have in regards to total audience delivery and aggregating metrics as opposed to compartmentalizing metrics, then you're able to sort of prove a point that you're reaching a larger audience, and by extension, you can create more of an opportunity for your advertisers that support your efforts.
Eddie, I was just going to prompt you because I know that the Bundesliga commissioned a Gen Z
right.
report. Is there anything from that Gen Z report that is indicative of sort of the changing trends? And
Absolutely. I think one of the findings in the report was that, for example, for Gen Z, they're consuming, I guess, less live sports, but at the same time, they're consuming more content from the Bundesliga. In the example of the
Thanks, House of
Bundesliga.
Highlights.
Yeah. So it's about second screen. It's about highlights, in-match clips, about finding information about their player from their home country. So the data is, of course, to serve the current fan, but we also want to use it and take it to see how we can convert future fans and how can we get other people to tune in and see what they like and what they. I mean, I think the survey conducted showed 4.5 hours of actual content consumed, include the game, but everything else is complementary and supplementary to the match. So information about the tactics, about the formations, this is all being consumed through a second screen, through an app or a smartphone. So that is a lot of data that we need to figure out, and how do we best deliver on that and give service what they want to see.
Yeah, that just reminds me when the domestic U.S. leagues all created their own networks and their channels, and people started to worry about how that would affect the third-party pieces. And then you have social media. And it brings me back to the point of what's the role of traditional media? Now, as I made this comment earlier, I think we think of traditional media as maybe linear TV or a magazine or or newspaper, though a Gen Z person might think of Facebook as traditional media at this point, right? So I don't even know if that's definable at this point, but how do you approach traditional media? You sort of let it do its work. Eli, I know you talked about earlier about thinking it the other way. Could it be digital that's going to drive the programming or the ideation that you're doing on linear or traditional media? How does that, it's a sort of open-ended question, but how are you approaching traditional media when we're talking about OTT and social and all those other things?
How are you guys approaching it?
Well, I think of it less as traditional media, but I think there's always going to be an appetite for live, right? And everybody wants to experience live content, whether it's via OTT, whether it's via linear, whether it's in person. And you see various trends going in different directions. But I think there's always going to be an appetite for that, right? But as the data that they just cited shows, people still love to consume other content while they're consuming live content, right? And particularly in the sport we cover, and outside of MLS, most matches that people watch here are, besides Liga MX, are European matches, right? There's a lot of hurdles to getting casual fans and even diehard fans to be able to watch that, right? So what we see as an amazing opportunity here, especially for a sport that's been traditionally covered via the linear experience and watching basically appointment-based viewing, is there's so much opportunity to fill that extra time with other content, whether it's highlights, whether it's backstories around players, whether it's fan stories, whether it's new original series. And soccer fans want that, and casual fans want that. So I see that as a big opportunity for traditional media businesses, for digital-first media businesses. And it sounds like, based on the conversation that we're having here, that everybody is thinking that way as well.
I think you have to. Sorry.
Go on, Eddie.
I think you have to remember, for outside of the MLS, you can't go to the game. You can't go to the European games. You can't go to Latin American games. So it's a generation that's been growing up in the U.S. seeking out content through social, through digital. So it's kind of their home to go there and
Starting place.
find it.
It's their starting
Exactly.
place for finding it.
So these are actively, and they're opting in to consume this content. It's a completely different behavior than if you grew up in Germany going every Sunday to the match, Saturday to go see your team play. So this is something that, I think it works all in an ecosystem, linear with the supplement of the second screen and things like that, only to give you kind of the feeling of being there or seeing that for yourself.
Yeah, I was gonna make 2 points, but I've forgotten. Cheers, Eddie, I've forgotten.
Perfect, that's great.
Sorry. The first point I was going to make was we talk a lot about data and social media, but storytelling is still the key. And for us, for winning new fans and going into new markets, we've got to story tell in these markets. And traditional media, TV, we still have a magazine, and we put a lot of effort into creating crafting that monthly magazine. In those and on TV, we can really tell the deep and meaningful stories that are going to win the hearts and minds are going to win affinity amongst fans and new fans. So we still think traditional media is a huge part of our ecosystem. The other thing, I still can't remember the other thing I was going to say.
Fine, it'll come back to you. But that's a lot of focus on media, and we talked about, sorry, Jerome, you talked about fan engagement in general, tours, worrying about in-stadium, things of that nature. What's sort of the differences there, obviously, with localizing it in international markets, but what's that look like recently?
And starting with data, obviously, we all have, as I said, a lot of data through social and digital, but as clubs and leagues, we have also other types of data from ticketing, from e-commerce, from merchandising that we distribute around the world. So for us, it's about integrating all those data and making sure that we enhance the fan experience. Obviously, those fans that cannot get to the stadium, but also the fan that can get to the stadium. And it's really important to bridge this together. We recently launched at PSG what we call the PSG experience, where obviously if you go to the stadium, you can have access to a wonderful tour of the stadium. But beyond that, we've created a brand new VR experience at the Parc des Princes, where you can just play with the players, try to kick a goal to Keylor Navas or pass with Mbappe, which is great, fly over Paris, but also engage with our team in a much different way. And this is currently present for PSG fans that have access to the Parc des Princes, but the idea is to take this to the broader fans around the world and make sure that if they're in New York or in Miami, they cannot get to the Parc des Princes at some point, they will still be able to almost touch the players using new technologies. And for us, this is really also the next step, is how do we help local fans not just get localized or personalized content, but also physically engage through new technologies, VR, AR, mixed reality with our fans.
Yeah. And that physical engagement part, I remember, I think I brought this up to one of you earlier, Mark Cuban a couple years ago said when you get in the stadium, he wanted to eliminate the look down moments. He wanted you just to be engaged with what's happening on the court, what's happening on the Jumbotron, though everything we do is more or less to try to get you to also engage somewhere else. And at times that could take away from the actual live content piece that we may or may not be streaming. How does Bleacher is a great place to take that, because it's often short, snackable, to consume as much of it that adds up in those additional 4 hours, but maybe not this sort of linear approach to content it was before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great approach to try to take, especially when you're trying to get people in the stadium. But the reality is you go to all those stadiums, they have Wi-Fi enabled, right? And they want you to buy your concessions and buy gear on your phone. So I just think the reality, and the way actually when we were talking about our linear coverage of the game, and we got some pushback up front of, why aren't you guys showing the starting 11s in the first A block? And it's because most people who are diehard fans have seen that in Twitter 5 minutes ago, right? And why not be able to fill that time with a conversation, listening to informed analysts talk about the 11 or talk about the key moments of the day. So for us, it's, especially when we think about our Champions League coverage, or we think about complementing live coverage in general, it's seeing what people are going to get from different platforms and customizing content for those platforms.
I don't disagree, but the one thing that we try to do is, like, when we have to make those decisions, whether it's a conversation or showing the lineups or starting lineups or those traditional things, it almost feels like for us we have to do both. Because going back to the traditional media question earlier, this isn't a fully 100% converted audience that's only consuming right on the nonlinear side, right? There's still a massive place for linear execution, the live execution, and the complementary second screen experience is what really is driving the day-to-day. That's not to say that over time things won't change, but I don't think, look, there was a time when people said radio was going to disappear, and it's still there, right? So it's sort of complementary, but to the point being made, I have to also, when we sort of distribute and our team distributes this content, we have to also remember that there are people still in our audience who traditionally don't want that second screen experience, right? So that's the balancing act of making sure that you're serving every fan in that linear experience and also providing them with that robust second screen experience, which is important to those who don't care about the starting 11 being shown on the linear side. So it's not easy by any stretch. I think we're in a very tumultuous but positive time as it relates to consumption trends. But in that movement, you have to adapt with the audiences as they evolve as well. That's the only point I would make.
I've had a lot of those discussions
right?
in meetings, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we do have about 5 minutes left, so if there are any questions from the crowd, I think they can walk around a mic. Two here.
Hi, my name is Joseph Gans. I'm with the Football Business Academy based out of Geneva, Switzerland. My question is for Mr. Rivaldi. Yesterday we had the pleasure of hearing the FC Bayern Munich representatives come here. They talked about how, Bayern Munich have come to America 4 years out of the past 6. They just opened the Bundesliga offices in New York last year. Also, they talked about how they're doing a great job of breaking into the market, the 20% of the population that are soccer fans in the U.S. So I guess my question for you is if you have any insight about, also, I'm sorry, not to mention, the Bundesliga is going to be broadcasted on ESPN Plus very soon. So my question for you is basically, as a German-American soccer fan and as a German-American Bundesliga fan, is this the start of an even more beautiful partnership between the Americas and the Bundesliga? Are we going to see more growth together? Or is this about as good as it's going to get for soccer fans about the Bundesliga?
It's my job to keep growing the relationship between Germany and America. So
It better not be as good as it's going to get, right?
It better not be as good as it gets. I hope that I can improve that significantly. But yes, of course, we still have our remaining season with Fox Sports. Next season we'll have ESPN Plus, and we'll have that up to the World Cup. So we're very excited to see what we can do in terms of raising the awareness of the league, of the clubs, and really kind of penetrating the market and raising the awareness of the profile in the States, and then as well in Latin America. We'll see what we can do. So we've already started in the 1 year and learning a lot from the FC Bayern Munich office in New York, taking their learnings and insights. We've adapted and seeing, they've done an incredible job of engaging and raising the community and fan clubs, and seeing how we can help other clubs in the Bundesliga also do that in the States as well as in Latin America, kind of share those insights. And for the league, we're just trying to grow the popularity to get people more to tune in and watch the games. So things that we've been doing in the past, we just got back from Brazil. We did a huge fan experience there called the Bundesliga Experience. And we hope to keep doing that and at some point even bring that to the United States when it's ready for that.
How important is it for you guys who are kind of platforms for content to kind of raise awareness of the clubs that are not so visible, just so that you're not so dependent on their performance and the personality surrounding that? And I feel like some of those clubs also don't have the resources to reach this market. Do you guys feel a responsibility to amplify their presence here?
Yeah, I'd say the approach that we take is more personality and persona driven than club driven. We definitely partner and work with clubs, but I think the way that especially younger fans tend to engage with sport is not necessarily via an allegiance to a particular club, but a connection with a particular personality. So, especially in soccer, and you look at Bundesliga, or you look across various leagues, you tend to get some very interesting young personalities playing for non-traditional teams. They ultimately end up on the bigger clubs in time, but by identifying those personalities and that talent at a young age and starting to profile them and familiarize an audience with them, we feel like that is a good approach to being able to grow the game beyond just your top 4 or your top 6 or your Champions League teams. That's the approach that we've taken in the NBA. It's worked very well for us, and it's something we've applied to soccer, I'd say, in the last 5 years, and we see a similar response from our audience.
And just to chime in on that one, as also a rights holder, a lot of times we try to do that through content and good storytelling. If there are good stories to tell all the way, let's call it down the table, across a multitude of players, that's only going to drive more engagement with the rights that we've procured. And we know from data that if people watch 3 or more games or 3 or more leagues, they are much more likely to continue on with the product, right? Because it becomes something that's habitual, that they're using on a sort of a daily, hourly, weekly basis. So the more that we can get people consumed across the wide swath of what we have, the better off it would be. And we try to do that through telling good stories, making people interested, unearthing something that they may or may not be otherwise aware of, and that's often how you do it.
Just a quick comment from a club's perspective. Obviously, anything that will promote the league we participate in, to the League One, especially as the leading club for that league, will be very much pushing and helping and supporting. And then obviously at our level, since we have a very strong lifestyle positioning, it's how we engage with new fans and how we bring new people to our brand, which will then benefit to the rest of the league and hopefully of the growth of soccer. So
I wanted to add to that too. I think, when we look at the U.S. Hispanic audience, right, it's a diverse audience within itself, right? There's very different nationalities within it. And one of the things that we try to do is obviously focus on the storytelling, looking at the personalities. So like, for example, in the Premier League, Wolverhampton's taken on a larger, import for us because of Raul Jimenez. Whenever the South American players are featuring, we'll sometimes decide matches that we want to feature based on those players coming to the fore, because the U.S. Hispanic audience is very aspirational and they like to see their players, doing well overseas, et cetera. The other thing I'd say is that the Hispanic audience, we consider them the 200 percenters. So there was a time when it was purely Hispanic, Spanish language focused, but what we're seeing in social media and what we're seeing demographically is that the Hispanic audience is increasingly bilingual as well. And so we see them as 100% Hispanic, but they're also playing in the English language space as well, which means that we tell every story now. So there was a time where it was taboo to subtitle, right? An English superstar giving an interview in Spanish, you'd have to put a voiceover. Those days, for me at least, are gone. Now, the subtitle's okay because there's an audience, a complete audience you're trying to serve, the ones who don't speak English and the ones who do. And at the same time, you want to open up that experience across platforms for all the personalities, not just the ones that are Hispanic relevant or have that relevancy to the audiences that we typically serve. So,
Do we have time for more questions? I'm in extra time, I see. It's actually going up. Feels weird. It's after counting down.
there's no orchestra? Play us off.
I was just wondering, how do you guys, for anybody who wants to take it, the evolution and the rise of esports, how has that affected your strategy towards digital or traditional marketing and your overall strategies?
as one of the pioneer amongst the big club in esport, it has obviously been very important for us so far. We entered with FIFA, obviously, which is not only a way for us to connect with a younger audience, but also to understand better, especially outside of the European market, how the new fans, the new soccer fans, get connected to soccer through the esport rather than through normal sport. We then expanded to other types of sports because, again, the audience that we have access to through esports is different from the one we have. You have a lot of diehard soccer fans, but you have even much more fans that potentially have no clue what soccer is. And for us, it's a real way to differentiate our brand from a lot of the other teams. It has impacted, obviously, our marketing. We have partners now that come to us, not just because of our soccer team, but also because we have esports. We can engage with probably a younger audience. We can engage differently. We can take them different types of messages, and it's been critical. Now, how it will evolve is something that we're working on. We currently have teams. It's also a way to localize our brand. We have teams based in Asia, teams based in Europe, soon team based in the US, and that will be obviously a way to have a local asset that we currently don't have because our team is playing in Europe, obviously.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we take a lot of inspiration from actually what PSG have done, really brave moves in esports. But the great thing about esports is our players are so engaged with the content. It's the only brand, it's the only sponsor that the players are all queuing up to get involved with. So we've had a real success sort of dipping our toes into esports, and this season we're going even bigger with more competitions, more players, and but yeah, there's a huge crossover in our fan base in terms of those that are interested in esports. So well, it's just natural.
So I spoke earlier about being tactical and strategic on these media approaches and consumption trends. For us, we are very much looking closely and have announced, actually I think we released it a couple of days ago, some of the emphasis that we're placing on esports development. Internally, we've hired 3 gamers that play hours on Twitch within our channel.
Tough job.
On our behalf. It's a funny story. One of them was an associate producer. Apparently he's a stud playing Fortnite. And he approached us, and so, you know, he came and he thanked me profusely because now he could tell his mom he's getting paid to do what she used to say, stop playing video games. But all kidding aside, we're looking at how do we develop an authentic approach, a genuine approach to the way people are consuming that content, the way they're interacting with it. Let's make no mistake about it. Twitch was an early entrant, right? They have a very powerful presence there as a channel for watching and consuming this content. Mixer's now come in with some of the things they've done with Shroud and Ninja. And we're looking at both of those players and seeing, okay, where do we come in? I think where we can have an impact is through storytelling, creating more awareness for who these people are and what drives them to this sport. If we're addressing some of the second screen experiences, right? Here's that digital going back to linear, taking what Twitch and Mixer are doing and say, okay, how do we extrapolate from that experience and create something that people want to see on the linear side and on our social channels as well? Then maybe we're onto something. So we're still looking at it very importantly as a place of development that we should be paying attention to very closely.
Just an additional comment. I was reading an article, I'm not sure who he is, of a player in Germany. Is it Dortmund or?
The one who won the World Cup.
One who is playing on the A team soccer, and he's also part of the FIFA team of the club. So with our younger players being so much players, I mean, esport players, how many of them are going to become, you know,
Right.
real players and esport players?
Great.
Interesting.
Not gonna sleep.
Pretty nice. I think there's one in the back.
I think I lost my earpiece.
Keep going. Injury time.
This question is mostly for Travis and Eli. I'm curious, a lot of the content that you guys have is mostly tier 1 and adding different stories around professional soccer, for example. I'm curious what your strategy is to move downstream now that you're more digital into whether it's college, high school, even youth sports.
Yeah, I'd say if you look at the performance of our content, the storytelling that we do around fans and up-and-coming players performs actually just as well as some of our Tier A players. So when we look at our Tier A players or teams, so when we look at our content strategy for any given year, we look at the content that we create. It's almost, I mean, this is to sound a little bit more like a finance approach, but it's almost like portfolio management, right? Where you're creating certain content with a certain goal in mind, or whether it's brand awareness, whether it's a marketing aim, whether it's engagement, whether it's growing audience, whether it's partnerships. But we do see the opportunity to tell fan stories and focus on up-and-coming players we see it as just an important opportunity as it is to cover an interview with Paul Pogba or Mbappe. Granted, those are great opportunities and you never pass those up. But at the same time, like if you could, I'd say the best performing Champions League content that we put out last year was a story called "The World's Craziest Soccer Mom," and it was about a Real Madrid fan based here in Miami, mother of 3, who traveled to Madrid every other month to go see Madrid games, and that performed better than an interview we did with Neymar. And it was because it spoke to the authenticity of the fan. And you just have to go at different content types with different goals, and I see the opportunity and an obligation for us to tell stories about both players and fans.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of going below the line, if you will, and trying to figure out how we can tap into the stories that are coming out of these different youth leagues, local stories to the ones that you mentioned there as well. Look, we have the under-17 tournament that just finished recently. We tapped in very heavily into that and saw some record delivery. In the past, we've been involved with some associations at the local level to try and tell stories of up-and-coming stars that will, eventually, hopefully, make it to that next level. We were big believers of trying to figure out now with the Olympics, right, that we have next summer in Tokyo, trying to mine the stories of that mother who helped that athlete get to this point in their career. A lot of them are amateurs, right? And that experience that I've had over time working with NBC Sports on Olympic coverage has allowed us to really place value on not always the superstar, but the superstars in making. One of our beliefs is if you've made it to the World Cup or if you've made it to the Olympics, it doesn't matter where you come from. Even if you lose, you're a champion because you've made it. And so we have to tell those stories. And I think that, it's in our interest, given the audiences that we serve, to nurture and grow all of those products below the line, if you will, of the typical A-listers or A products.
So we're winding down here. So I'll finish up on one thing that's sort of become a passion point for myself and a group at work, which is women's sports and women's soccer, right? I'll have affiliations or clubs or women's clubs or covering the World Cup, broadcasting the Women's World Cup. How does that factor going forward? I think it should probably be a core part of the discussions at Soccerex going forward. But in your various roles, how has women's sports and women's fans played a role in your thinking as it relates to your content mix or your activations or becoming more cultural in that way? Leave it open to the group for that.
I was just going to say, our women's team has been a huge source of stories for us and content. It's a huge growth driver for us now. So where we know there's markets where we couldn't grow and there are segments that we couldn't grow, whereas now the women's team are really driving growth in those areas. So it's been a huge focus for us over the last couple of years, and very interesting from a sponsorship perspective as well, because we're opening new segments, new revenue opportunities for the club. But all in all, I'd say the stories are great. The women they make content really easy to make. Yep. Sometimes with first team players who have so many obligations, it's really hard to get the time. But the women's team have really bought into content, really bought into digital media. So breath of fresh air for us in terms of content.
100% agree. The stories that come from the women's game are amazing, and there's more opportunity to tell those stories. And I think, again, in a world where storytelling is so important to the experience that people are having, it's second to none. Having said that, we've also seen a real interest in the women's game. It was the most watched Women's World Cup in Spanish language history. Our streams were through the roof. And look, we didn't have certain teams in that tournament. We had Team USA, of course, and where their rights holder, or media rights licensee, along with the other rights holder in English language. But it was a tremendous thing to see, having been in this industry as long as I have, that the Hispanic audience and the audience that we serve really embraced the game this time, much more so than they have in the past. And I think that presents to us an indicative form of opportunity where we should be tapping more into women's athletics and sports. And that's why you'll see as well during the Olympics, we're going to double down on that also. And we're open for conversations for anyone who wants to talk to us about how we develop the game and the stories moving forward.
Yeah, I'd say focusing on personalities and personas as core drivers for our storytelling. The women's national team here in particular is some of the more important and influential personalities in sports here stateside, and our audience is engaged with it incredibly.
Awesome. Well, same for us. I mean, obviously, it's the access that we have to the women team players is a little bit easier than the one we have with the men's team, obviously. So we can create more stories, and the World Cup this summer was obviously, women's soccer will like that. With the World Cup, it's like that. Now the challenge is to continue to grow.
Correct.
And we know that the big games with the big players will continue to attract people. We know that at a grassroots level, it works well, especially in this country. But now the day-to-day of women's soccer has to continue to attract people in the stadium, but also online and digital and in front of TVs.
Just a coda on that, it relates back to how do you drive interest. Just one sort of tout from my side. We put out Goal 50 every year, and we actually dedicated 25 spots to women this time. Megan Rapinoe was number one. She should have been this year. But just the uptick we saw in traffic because it was basically something new to read. It was something new to consume while and thinking about those people playing in their local leagues and their local competitions after the World Cup. So I think that is something we will continue to see because the access is great, the storytelling is great, and it's genuinely something new and exciting for all kinds of fans. So we're over. I hope you've enjoyed the panel and this group. Wide range of experience and roles and what have you, and it could have went in a number of different directions, but hopefully it was worthwhile. And you're all sobered up now, and appreciate your time. And thanks for.
Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
job.
man.